Welcome to our podcast, JC Sports YouTube page, Detroit Red Wings hockey on the JC Sports YouTube page. So if you're new to the channel and you like the Red Wings content, we're going to have a lot more coming your way, obviously, with our stretch drive to the playoffs. Hopefully we get to the playoffs. Obviously, they're in a good mark. But I heard something Saturday after the Tampa Bay game. It was on CBC, Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet, by Elliot Friedman. And I view Elliot Friedman as one of the best hockey insiders next to Pierre LeBrun, Darren Dreger, and Bob McKenzie, guys like that. He's been very, very on point with some of the things he says. Obviously, everything he hears doesn't come to fruition. That's the way it works in the NHL and in sports in general. But I was interested in what he said about Vladimir Tarasenko. So I'm gonna play this clip for you. It's about a minute 50 long. So bear with me. I'll give you my opinion, what I think about what he said on the podcast, the 32 Thoughts podcast.
Lines on Saturday with Ron, and the lead one was Vladimir Tarasenko with Detroit. So he wins a cup last year with Florida, signs a 2-year deal with the Red Wings. So he'll have another year after this one at $4.75 million. Is he someone that could be looking for a fresh start or somewhere to be used in a different way than he is currently with the Red Wings turning it up?
It's just, if you look at how they've gone, he's sort of the one guy that has been the odd fit. And, he has a no trade clause. So ultimately he has control. But I think, I was talking to some people who see the Red Wings a bit more than I do. And they weren't surprised to hear that, in the sense that, as the team's gotten better and some players have started to play better, it has still been a bit of a square peg in a round hole for Tarasenko. I got to think that, Florida doesn't have a lot of flexibility. They don't have a lot to deal, and they don't have a lot of cap room, but they know the player. That was actually the first thing I thought of when I got off the air. I bet in particular Tarasenko would probably love to go back there too. But I just don't know where this is going to go out. I think it's just safe to say there's something going on there. I think there's an understanding that this has been a harder fit than everybody expected. And I've just been told in a couple of different places, like, don't be surprised if something happens here, because it's a lot of good vibes with the Red Wings, but not in this particular case.
So what you heard there from Mr. Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast was, look, this hasn't worked out like they have thought it would. Obviously, Vladimir Tarasenko has a no trade clause. When he came to the Red Wings, I thought there was a chance that he could be as good as he was. Obviously, him being 33 years old is not, ideal. Yzerman has had his issues in free agency, in my opinion, but this is an issue that if maybe it's Todd McLennan going to Yzerman and Tarasenko agreeing, maybe it's a joint effort. I also think there's a chance that this could be a way that Steve Yzerman could potentially be figuring out who to trust at the trade deadline. I remember a couple years ago, and it was floated out by Elliot Friedman, because that's what usually happens. There was also Darren Dreger floated out. And it was about Phil Perrana going to the Islanders. And all of a sudden, he went to the Canucks. Now, I'm not saying that, that he wouldn't do deals with Lou Lamoriello, because Lou Lamoriello is the guy who will keep it under wraps. But he heard it from somewhere. It got out. Usually in the Canadian media, it gets out quicker than most markets. But Tarasenko hasn't been good this year. And when we look at the statistics, I mean, he's had 7 goals, 15 assists, 22 points, -8. My whole feeling on Tarasenko is this. If they do decide to trade Tarasenko, what are they going to get from him? Probably not much. The Red Wings might have to eat money on the 2-year deal. I know that's not what the Red Wings want to do, but they might have to do that. The second part about it is, on the Red Wings side, does trading a guy like Tarasenko open the door for maybe Amadeus Lombardi to come up, or Dominic Shine full time, or perhaps maybe a Nate Danielson or someone along those lines? Because obviously there's going to be a hole to fill. on the roster. And whoever fills it, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And could it be a deadline deal? Could it be a deal during the Four Nations face-off? Because in that same podcast, Elliot Friedman was saying that the trades could be active during the Four Nations tournament. That's very interesting. But can we see Tarasenko getting traded? Perhaps. It's only a report. I'm only saying we're only bringing this up because I think there's two methods to this madness. One, it could be Steve Yzerman floating this out to someone that he's working on a deal with, and they gave this information to Elliot Friedman. That's what usually happens because we all know Steve Yzerman. Nothing gets out on his end. Usually, it stays in house, and then once it's done, it's done. So 10-1, I believe this is coming from another franchise. That's number one. Number two, it'll be interesting to see what comes about out of this. Obviously, the way the Red Wings are playing right now, the way the younger kids are playing, like we're seeing, Soderblom and Berggren and Johansson and Edvinsson and Casper playing really good minutes. And obviously a guy like Casper has really taken a spot from Tarasenko. So, you know, it comes down to this point. Obviously, they're going to have a collective meeting with, Todd McLennan is going to have a collective meeting with Yzerman. Yzerman's going to say, Todd, what do you think about this? What do you want to do with this? And they're going to make a decipher best action for this team. And I go back to when the Tigers were in their last year with the playoffs and everything. They made a trade, and I don't think we're going to have this kind of trade for the Red Wings because a guy like Trey Sweeney, I mean, baseball's weird at the trade deadline, but it could be a call up that makes it come up. So the Tigers traded Jack Flaherty to the Dodgers. They got Trey Sweeney in the deal. They got the catcher, the Vizicano, or whatever the guy's name is. And then by the end of the year, Trey Sweeney was playing above average defensive play. He was the starting shortstop for the Detroit Tigers, and it kind of moved the needle. So what I'm trying to get to is maybe, just maybe, if Tarasenko is traded, it opens up an opportunity for someone from the Grand Rapids Griffins, and that could be a huge piece of the puzzle going forward into the playoffs, but also going forward into the future. And I think that, Tarasenko was a guy that they were just trying to replace scoring with. And obviously the Red Wings were not scoring early on. And to be honest, Tarasenko hasn't really scored that much. Obviously, 7 goals on a season. He had a good game against Tampa Bay, but part of when he said there it's a square peg in a round hole, it kind of leads me to believe that he doesn't fit what Todd McLennan wants. And I think it's a mutual kind of parting of the ways. I think the Red Wings, if they're going to trade Tarasenko, they're going to do him right. They're going to trade him to a team that he would like to go to. They might not get the greatest return, but that's what happens when you make a mistake and then you want to, send a good message to other leaders, other, veterans in the league that, if something doesn't go the way we think it's going to go and it potentially can go haywire, we're going to give you the best situation. We're going to make a fair effort to get you to where you want to go. And I think that's what Steve Yzerman is going to try to do because at the end of this, like he said, you could perhaps eat money, but I think that if Tarasenko doesn't want to be here, if there's any reservation from Todd McLennan that, he doesn't think Tarasenko is a fit here or Yzerman thinks that there's no fit here, that obviously a trade can happen. In my opinion, I think this trade is coming from an outside source. I think it's coming from like a team that maybe Yzerman has spoken to, and that's who it's got out by. And I think that that's kind of a way that CVY tries to, figure out who he's going to do business with. I think that, in the first year, there was a trade at the trade deadline that involved the Flyers, and we haven't seen Stevie Y go back to that apple cart again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Tarasenko going forward. But I got to tell you, he hasn't been the best player since he's came here, and maybe a fresh start is needed for him. But also maybe a fresh start is needed for the Detroit Red Wings. Maybe the guy that they bring up, like a Amadeus Lombardi, maybe a Nate Danielson, or perhaps if things don't work out in the Swedish League hockey league playoffs, they bring up a Sandin Pellikka during the playoffs. anything could be used. So let's see what happens with this saga right now. Obviously, this is not something that Detroit Red Wings fans want, but I believe that it's something that we're going to have to live in the reality and see what goes on past this. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from this point forward. But as always, if you want to stay up to date, we will give you up to date Red Wings news coming out of the Four Nations tournament and going forward all throughout the rest of the year. So we will see you in the next video as we talk more Detroit Red Wings hockey here on the Red Alert Podcast on the Jason Sports YouTube page. And thank you for subscribing and thank you for watching. Like that video, and I appreciate it very much.